Please note this interview covers a sensitive topic and may not be suitable for all listeners. You're listening to Voces Críticas, Critical Voices. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcón. Today I'm with artist-photographer Jan Goff LaFontaine. Jan Goff LaFontaine believes in creating social change, empowering women and girls, one photograph at a time. She's an award-winning photographer and author whose work has been exhibited in museums and galleries throughout the United States. Her book, Women in Shadow and Light, Journeys from Abuse to Healing, received the Book of the Year in Women's Issues Award from the Independent Publishers Association. LaFontaine's work provides insight into the lives of women sexual assault survivors who have chosen to focus on healing for themselves and others. Jan's visual photography projects reflect a collaboration between the survivors themselves and the photographer, giving survivors an opportunity to regain a strong sense of self. Her projects of hope, healing, and transformation can be seen on college campuses across the nation. I'm also here with Jaqueline Mendoza and Jessica Espinoza, both of whom have worked with Jan. For the last several years, Jaqueline Mendoza, or Jackie, speaks as a survivor and advocate for people healing from sexual abuse and assault through her collaboration with Jan's Speaking Out exhibit at Cabrillo College. It was at Cabrillo College that Jackie decided to completely open up and be part of the exhibit as a student representative that featured a self-portrait and her story. She now assists Jan in interviewing and photographing other students that allow them to be part of their healing journey to speak out against violence directed at women. Jessica Marie Espinoza is a social justice activist who is currently in her senior year at UC Santa Cruz, majoring in sociology. She's devoted her life to service in the community of Santa Cruz. Her volunteer work spans from sexual assault awareness and healing at Cabrillo College, working with survivors of domestic violence at the Walnut Avenue Family and Women's Center, co-facilitating writing workshops at Santa Cruz Main Jail with the Inside Out Writing Project, corresponding with incarcerated persons with the Barrios Unidos Prison Project, as well as speaking out against police brutality and the medical neglect of incarcerated people. Jessica was the first woman interviewed for Jan's Speaking Out project. Jessica is a mother to her 12-year-old son, whom she's raising to treat women with respect, to speak out against the sexual objectification and abuse towards women, as well as to practice consent. She believes that it's critical to raise our boys with great care and awareness so that they grow into strong men who contribute to the dismantling of abusive women. Welcome to Voces Críticas. Jan, I would like to start with you. I'd like to start by discussing the powerful quote you have featured on your website. Quote, "Creating social change, empowering women and girls, one photograph at a time." Why and how does photography, or even art more generally, have this power to create and empower and even heal as your work tries to do?
Women generally take on self-blame and shame when they are assaulted sexually or physically. Photographing women looking at their beauty, I could reflect that back to them. And the portraits in this project reflect their concept of their healing. So being able to be photographed with someone looking solely at their beauty and being able to express themselves through their photograph, express their healing and their journey through that photograph is incredibly healing for them.
So photographs really capture a moment, right? They capture this moment that can reverberate and that can be lasting in many ways. So when you're approaching your craft, when you're approaching this art of photography, do you think about this question of endurance, of this longevity of the photo? And how do you think about moving beyond that moment that the camera happens to capture?
It does capture a moment. That is where they are in their healing at that particular moment. But I feel that that photograph represents their healing to them, and every time they look at it, they go, okay, that's where I was in that moment. Look how far I've come. Or look at the photograph that represents their healing and say, okay, I have to keep trying. I have to keep trying. This is my healing. This is my journey. So it does capture that moment in time, but it also helps them move forward into the next moment.
And Jessica and Jackie, so nice to have you guys here too. Can you tell me why you wanted to collaborate with Jan? And Jessica, we can start with you.
Well, when she came and gave a presentation at my women's self-defense class that I was in at Cabrillo College, it really spoke to me and inspired me. She gave a presentation on her book, Women in Shadow and Light. And when I saw her presentation, I just felt really inspired by her, and I just felt like connected to her on an emotional level. And seeing the women in the photos and how empowered they seemed, it definitely made me want to engage in that type of healing work as well, to see how that would work for me.
And Jackie, what about for you?
I was actually club representative for the Interclub Council at Cabrillo, and I saw a woman in there that I recognized her portrait. She was older than me, and I think she mentioned she was like a mom too. So I felt comfortable asking her, like, how did that feel? Because I was interested, but I didn't know anything about the project. And she said that was very, like, empowering, and that it really helped her, like, heal. And, you know, it was a really good move, basically, to be part of the project. So I was like, okay. And I really don't know how I got, like, in contact with Jen, but it was a time for me that I wanted to own up to my abuse, and I wanted to kind of lay it all out there. And I feel like this was the one way I could do it. And it was tangible, and it was just taking the opportunity to really put my face out there and my text and my story. For me, putting it out there meant that I no longer was hiding it, and that I no longer was a victim of it, and that I could help other people.
And Jessica, what was it like to have your story out there in public? And had you shared your story before?
I had never shared my story publicly like that before. In fact, there were many years that I suppressed it and didn't even remember it happening to me. And basically, I was feeling pretty nervous at first, you know, knowing that I would be coming back to Cabrillo campus after spring break, and my healing portrait, you know, and story were going to be on display. So I was nervous at first, but I got through that, and I ended up feeling like free. I felt liberated.
And Jackie, for you, what was it like having your story out there in the public? This was the first time you two had also shared your story. Is that right?
To strangers? Yeah. I'd shared my story in high school. We took it to court because I wrote a paper in my English class, and I used metaphors and that kind of thing, but they knew what I was talking about. So the next day, you know, mandated reporter. They had to report it. So it all just kind of came out to my family, to close friends, families, and that kind of thing. So I felt like I've been through that hard part of people who knew me as a child when it happened, to growing up to a teenager, that I had already gone through that exposure, or that feeling of being exposed. But to strangers, it was a little more intimidating. At the time, I was an engineering major, so most of my peers were men or males, so it was very, I guess, awkward to think of them seeing me like in a portrait and knowing that kind of vulnerability. At the time of the interview, I was a student Senate representative, and when the opening happened, I was a vice president, so I was super nervous. But it ended up being very nice because they saw like a human side of me and more of who I really am versus who I'm trying to portray or represent. Because I do represent a huge student population that does, or that has gone through an assault or abuse, so I felt like that was even more empowering.
We had met through the Digital Nest, and one of the comments that the young women said to me after they interviewed you, and they were sort of on this interview high after talking to you, they had said, I think we're going to save some lives when we share this interview. That speaks to, I think, the power of sharing your story and having the courage to do so, that someone out there who's on a different part of their journey, it'll resonate with them. It's really powerful to share your story in that way. So Jan, let's talk about the kinds of conversations you want your photography to compel. One of the things I had talked about with Nina Simon, who's the former director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, was that art and artifacts can actually be the way in which to open up conversations that need to be happening within our society. So could you talk to me a little bit about how your photographs in and of themselves are playing this facilitator role for this dialogue that needs to happen around violence against women, around sexual assault, around sexual violence?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different kinds of conversations about this topic that can happen. And what I hope my work does is inspire a conversation that includes hope and moving forward. When I do the interviews, I ask them briefly about what happened to them, but we don't stay there. We focus on how they've moved forward, what has helped them to heal, what can they say that will help other women to heal. So the conversation that I want to happen is about beauty, taking your power back, moving forward, healing. And I think I could do photographs that were gory and horrible and people would turn away. But I do photographs that represent beauty and healing, and people can handle that.
I think it has the conversation start from a different point then, when that's the premise, right? And it's the premise is not fixated on the story, but on that journey that I think your photography is doing. I'm fascinated by the collaborative process you've talked about, where you and the survivor are kind of in a negotiation or collaboration with how the photographs will be captured. Can you talk a little bit about how that idea for that kind of collaborative process came to be, why that is such an important part of the work that you do?
Well, it's very much a collaboration, and I just feel like I'm kind of the vehicle. I'm the person pressing that shutter, but the portrait belongs to each woman, and I want it very much to be hers. She chooses the location. We have a big discussion during the interview, after the interview, about what kind of environment feels healing for you, what did you do that helped you to heal. So all of that goes into the portrait, and each portrait is very individual. I don't do much directing during the photo shoot. I want them to feel whatever it is that they're feeling about their healing, and I want it to be really theirs. And a lot of magic has happened during those photo shoots. There are always things when I look at the photos afterwards, and this happened during the shooting of the book too, that something will appear in the photo that I'll go, oh, look at that, butterfly was on your shoulder or whatever. So I think it's a magic process, but it's all focused around her vision of her healing.
Please note this interview covers a sensitive topic and may not be suitable for all listeners. You're listening to Jan Goff LaFontaine, an award-winning photographer and author whose work provides insight into the lives of women sexual assault survivors who are focused on healing for themselves and others, as well as hope and transformation. You're also listening to Jaqueline Mendoza and Jessica Espinoza. Jaqueline speaks as a survivor and advocate for people healing from sexual abuse and assault, and has been a collaborator with Jan's Speaking Out exhibit at Cabrillo College for the last several years. Jessica Espinoza is a social justice activist and currently a senior at UC Santa Cruz, majoring in sociology. Jessica was the first woman to be interviewed for Jan's Speaking Out project, a photographic exhibit which focuses on healing from sexual assault and abuse. Jackie, what was it like to be part of that collaborative experience in terms of being asked to really co-create, if you will, with Jan on your portrait?
I guess that's like a two-sided answer. One side is that I feel very special to be part of their healing process, because usually we don't know them, before the interview. So suddenly they're opening up and we're talking about, how they picture their healing. And depending on where they are in their healing journey, it could either be very straightforward, or we're all just going to go to the forest and see what happens. So it's very special to be part of that. And because I've already done it, when I see that they're shy or hey, this is okay, just remember, this is about your healing. I remember when I took mine, Jen's stop posing. You're right, I'm posing. And I took it meditating. So I had to really just focus on breathing and what helped me heal, in that moment. So I try to be that for them too, just be more supportive and assure them that it's beautiful.
And Jessica, for you, what was it like to be a co-collaborator with Jan on the vision and on the outcome of your own photograph?
I will say that was a rough morning for me. I was nervous, I was running late, and I didn't have time to blow dry my hair or put any makeup on or anything. So when I got to Westcliff, because that's where I had my photo taken, I was feeling a little stressed, but then Jan made me feel really comfortable, and I was also nervous too because it was the daytime and I was on the cliff with no top on and basically in my underwear and had this white scarf. As we moved through the photo shoot, I felt more and more comfortable and empowered. So it was nice to have a say in it as well, because it did make me feel like I had some control over the situation.
And why did you pick Westcliff?
I chose Stockton Avenue on Westcliff because that's where my uncle Arthur Deans, his ashes were spread there, and he was a big part of my support system, and he died of cancer. So whenever I go there, I feel at peace and supported and loved.
Jessica, can you talk a little bit about the role of silence and how that became or how that factored into the process of healing, maybe the delay in that process of healing, the power of silence in telling your story?
Yes, I think that's really important. For me, my silence manifested into some really unhealthy behaviors that were very harmful to myself as well as others. For me, that manifested into drug and alcohol addiction. And I feel like once I began my healing journey and actually decided to face myself and my past, that's when I actually felt like I was able to start getting a grip on my addictions and fully participate in my recovery.
And Jackie, for you, what role did silence play in your healing or in your story?
Silence is very crippling. It's part of the reason why you stay in this hole and you don't really come out of it, or you don't see a way out of it. So I was abused since age 4 to 11. Around 7, I did have a really dark moment in the shower, stared out the drain, and I was I think I'm done. I think I'm just ready to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't see it getting any better. But I felt like a wave, and I was wow, actually I'm not done. It's okay, and I could keep going. When you're silent about that kind of abuse or violence, it's very lonesome. And I wasn't silent in a way of not telling anyone what happened to me, but I would tell my friends in 4th grade or something, and they didn't know what to do, and I knew they didn't, which is why I told them. I knew they didn't have any authority really to really change my situation, and I chose not to tell the people that did have that authority because I was afraid of what was going to happen, because I had an unstable home. And the only person that was really there for me was my mom. It was my babysitter's husband who molested me at the time, so I felt like my mom trusted them with me and my brother, and that if I were to tell them, what happened, what was happening, and expose the issue, that it would, rock the boat. I was more embarrassed for him than he was for himself, because I knew his grandchildren, we played together. That kind of thing. So I just felt like I didn't want to do that to someone. Just totally pervert their image of someone, an adult figure in their life. I mean, silence doesn't help anyone, and it doesn't help yourself.
Silence has this unseen control over how you're healing, how you tell your story.
And it's too fear-based. I don't think it's a rational move when it comes to healing, because you at least have a soundboard, whether or not it's positive feedback or negative, because you could have definitely negative feedback, which is why I think a lot of people stay silent. But you at least release it from your chest so it doesn't have a hold on you anymore.
Jan, a little while ago, you talked about the magic that sometimes you are a witness to when it comes to doing this work and doing this project. What does it mean to be a witness to healing that's happening in process, this magic that's happening because you as an artist have created the conditions in which that process can unfold?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful to all of these women for trusting me, for allowing me to be a part of that moment in their healing, for giving me their hearts and trusting me to hold it in a sacred space. That takes a great deal of courage and vulnerability to be able to do that, both for the interview and the photo process. When you asked me that question, I was thinking of Jessica when we photographed her and how she was so tense in the beginning of that. It was quite a day. And I could see she was upset and she was tense. And I could see that in her face. I could see it in her eyes. And as time went on and she started to relax and she started to trust me a little bit more, I think, I could see that in her face and her eyes as well. So it was like I could see her healing happening right before me in these little tiny ways. And it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. And I feel like that happens a lot with this process because it is definitely a process of trust and courage and bravery. These women are incredible. I admire them so much. And I think going back to just gratitude for them sharing that little piece of their hearts with me.
And Jessica and Jackie, how has your own sense of yourself, your journey, how has it changed after this collaboration and connection with Jan?
Well, I'd have to say that I've kind of gone like forward and then like backward, forward, backward, but taking 2 steps forward, 1 back. So I've been making progress, and when I had Jan and her husband Roger over for dinner at my home, we were discussing the past, essentially, and I was identifying, in the victim role, and that's not the mindset that I want to have. Something that Roger had actually said to me that deeply resonated was that I am not my past, like there's so much more to Jessica than being a survivor of sexual assault, and that like really hit home with me. So I'd say that after engaging in the project, I would take like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I've continued to move that way, But the beautiful thing is that I have that awareness now of when I am taking that step backwards.
I remember a mentor of mine saying that we need to imagine who we are without our pain, right? And I remember all of us at the table started crying because it's so hard to think about who that person is supposed to be because that is who we're meant to be. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Jackie, for you?
I remember before Jan, I hadn't even thought about it, actually. Like, when we got the interview, she was asking me questions about healing and that kind of thing, and I wasn't used to being asked those questions. So it took 2 hours, only because I felt like my healing was a very independent journey. I remember I asked myself at one point, like, to differentiate, like, the trauma me and the me that I want to be, that I am, that I know I can be. And then I realized that there is no difference. Like, I don't know who I am without this experience. And it's not a bad thing. Because I learned at a young age, because it did happen at a young age, like, I had some serious boundaries. Like, and being sexually harassed at school, like in middle school, high school, you don't understand your responses until it already happened. I was violent. Like, I had an older brother. We'd beat up on each other, so it wasn't foreign to me to, like, really be defensive when someone touched me. But I didn't know how bad it was for me to do that, or, like, what a toll it took. So, just like Jess, like, my awareness grew as I got to really face my healing as healing, not just me trying to get some peace in my life or peace of mind, but as, healing from these experiences that I went through. So I feel like I really matured after the interview because I also got to be more on the other side of the camera, really see myself in them, but also see where I was and where I could be, because some of the women are very advanced in their healing, and they have kids, and they're teaching them, teaching them consent, all these vital things in life that are very important to ending this kind of violence.
Yeah, those vital life skills. You cannot start them early enough.
Yeah. I'm pregnant now, so that was a huge milestone for me. And I'm having a girl. I think this is the epitome of my healing, because I don't think I could have done it without, having gone through all of these negative and positive things in my life. I did not picture being a mom. So I really grew to be confident, not only in myself, but in the world, and trust myself more and trust others.
So I think in both of your cases, you guys are both healers and healing, right?
Yeah.
And so you guys are in that path. Jan, could you talk a little bit about how did the idea for the Speaking Out campaign emerge for you? How did that come to be? Because it's been now many years at Cabrillo College.
Well, my book, Women in Shadow and Light, came out in 2006, I think. And I had met a woman at Cabrillo named Kim Bellevue. I took her yoga class, and, I was in my 60s and everybody else was 18 or 20. So I became friends with Kim. And she also taught the women's self-defense class that Jessica had mentioned. And she asked me if I would come and speak to her class. So I spoke to her class for, 5 or 6 years, a long time. And every time I spoke, somebody would come up afterwards and share their story and say, I've never told anyone this. If you ever do anything like this again, I'd love to be part of it. So I got that every time. And one time I was driving to her class thinking about questions I would get and things that people would say. And I just decided, I think it's time. I need to do this project at Cabrillo because there's all of these women that have come up to me, and how many more are not saying something? Lots. And so I told Kim when I went in the class that I was going to do that, and she said, that's awesome, and God bless her, I couldn't have done it without her because there was a lot of red tape to get through.
Institutions like ours are known for their red
tape.
Yeah.
So I started it that day, and I told people that I was going to be doing it, and 4 women came up to me afterwards. So I thought, okay, we'll have 4. That'll be awesome. There's 4 women that are speaking out, and they'll encourage others. And then by the time we got to April, we did the opening during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And by the time we got there, we had 12. And people just heard about it. And I never have had any trouble finding people to be part of this, sadly, because there's so many. And so it started out as that. I interviewed and photographed these 12 women, and we had an exhibit that April and had no idea who was going to show up or what it would be like, but a lot of people showed up. It was interesting that day. All the women, I think maybe a couple had said they would speak after I talked, and then they said, no, I can't. And everybody walked in there kind of being very small, and everybody walked out about a foot taller because it ended up that everybody spoke. And there was such good feedback from the audience and good questions and everything, and they felt very supported. And I've had this experience before of women going, I don't know, this is kind of embarrassing, and still feeling that shame. And then by the end of that period, they felt so supported by all the people in the audience, not just me and not just each other. They helped each other. I mean, I remember them holding hands and going up there and saying, okay, I'm going to speak. And that was beautiful, how they supported each other, and how many people approached me afterwards and said, if you're going to do this again, I'd like to be part of it. So it's just grown, and I think it's really changed the climate and the thought process around sexual assault on campus, and really allowed a lot of people to speak out. I know the student counseling department always has more people come to them for counseling when that exhibit is up. And that's a good thing because people are seeking help. So it's allowed not just the women who were part of it to move forward, but a lot of other people as well. And not just women, also men.
And this kind of reminds me of the sort of national reckoning or really global reckoning that's happening with whether it be the Me Too movement or the Time's Up. If all three of you could comment on what does it mean to have this sort of reckoning that's happening, this very public reckoning that's happening, that are really trying to convey to the public how prevalent this is. So what does it mean to you to see these national movements happening? We can start with you, Jan.
I think it's amazing, awesome, incredible, wonderful that it is becoming a public conversation. It's not just something whispered behind closed doors. It's becoming very obvious to everybody how prevalent this is. Even if they haven't personally had that experience, they're getting how prevalent it is. I think that what I would like to see happen is the next step. Like, okay, you said Me Too, so we get that. This happened to you. But now what? Where can you get help? What can we do for you that's going to help you? What can you do for others to bring them along to help them as well? So I think that has to be the next step. There has to be some movement forward. You can't stay stuck in that, okay, Me Too, I'm a victim. Because as Jessica was saying, you have to move forward from that. You can't identify as that being primarily who you are. So that's what I want to see.
And Jessica, for you, how have these movements, what have they meant for you?
Like Jan, I think that it's great, that this discussion is happening, that people are coming forward. And I do also agree that it is important to move towards a solution as well, which I know that this is an epidemic. This is not something new. This is a historical issue, and it's something that goes far back. I just think about all the women of color, Native Americans, African Americans. So this is nothing new, but I think that it's a beautiful thing that people are being so brave and speaking out against sexual assault and sharing what has happened to them, but I think that's just the beginning. I really look up to the women that have spoken out, and I have a lot of respect for them. It takes a lot of courage to do so, especially on the level that a lot of these women have. So that's seen worldwide, and I think that it's creating this wave that's allowing other women to feel safer to come out and share their experiences. It's empowering. I, too, believe that it's critical that we stay in the solution, and I know that there's a lot to that. With sexism, rape culture, patriarchy, this is a deep-seated issue, and like Jan had mentioned, too, it doesn't just affect women, it affects boys and men as well. But I really think that addressing the patriarchy and sexism is, super critical,
Absolutely. In fact, I always tell my students, my male students in particular, patriarchy is not doing you any favors as well. So you should be feminist and anti-patriarchal as well, because it hurts them in ways that maybe they have not processed. Right. Jackie, for you, what's it been like seeing these national movements and conversations taking place?
There's a lot of good points being made about it that, increases exposure, especially social media, because you're targeting a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't probably look into these issues. The problem I've had with it, because I haven't personally participated in it, is because I'd rather it be like I healed too. Because we don't focus on what happened to you, like the details in the project, for this exact reason that we want to focus on your healing and the journey afterward, because that's really hard stuff. Your body keeps the score. And also it affects, everyone, because we have relationships and we have people in our lives that care about us and that want us to succeed. But the fact that we hold on to certain events, we don't move forward. So
it sounds like we might have to do another campaign.
Yeah. I told Jan on the way here, I was like, these interviews come at a very awesome time, have awesome timing, because first it was Kavanaugh. Now it's Epstein. It's these powerful figures, political figures, and just powerful people with their wealth, until it hits like the justice system and they do their job and they actually like convict these people at the same rate as like some person with a joint, just, you know, to be accountable.
Yeah, and I think the question around rape culture takes it beyond just the individual. Like, there's usually a circle of enablers, especially these high-profile cases. I want to thank you all for coming in and for talking and sharing about your stories and your collaboration. I wanted to give you an opportunity to say final words, perhaps to a survivor who's listening, maybe a message you would like to send.
I guess that I would say what I've said so many times before is take the first step. Talk to somebody, even if it's an anonymous person on a helpline. Tell somebody what happened to you, because I think that speaking it is the first step toward healing. Then you can start to get help. You can start to move forward and heal.
I would say you're not alone. And I know that it feels like you are, but you're really not. And there's someone that loves you. And that there's nothing in this world that you would have done to deserve this. So don't ever think that you do. It's never your fault. So you love yourself, be happy. And that's the greatest thing you could do to yourself in this world.
And Jessica, the final word goes to you.
A message to any survivors out there. I'd just like you to know that you're not alone and that you are worthy of unconditional love. And that includes self-love, which is most important in my opinion, and that you're not dirty and what happened to you doesn't define you, and that whenever you're ready, there are people out here that really do care about you and will embrace you and help you along your healing journey. It's up to you, but just know that there is help and people that care about you.
So when you're ready, reach out. Thank you all so much for this incredible conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Jan Goff LaFontaine, an award-winning photographer and author whose work provides insight into the lives of women sexual assault survivors who are focused on healing for themselves and others, as well as hope and transformation. You were also listening to Jaqueline Mendoza and Jessica Espinoza. Jaqueline speaks as a survivor and advocate for people healing from sexual abuse and assault, and has been a collaborator with Jan's Speaking Out exhibit at Cabrillo College for the last several years. Jessica Espinoza is a social justice activist and currently a senior at UC Santa Cruz, majoring in sociology. Jessica was the first woman to be interviewed for Jan's Speaking Out project, a photographic exhibit which focuses on healing from sexual assault and abuse. If you're someone who feels like you need to talk to someone or in need of any kind of support, I encourage you to call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673 or go to their website, www.rain.org. That's www.rain.org. Again, that number is 1-800-656-4673. You can also reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. Their website is suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Thanks so much for listening.